Welcome to the ParentNet podcast by Focus on the Family Singapore. In each episode, we'll be speaking with everyday parents and practitioners as they share with us gems from their parenthood journey. Keep tuning in to learn with us as we figure it out together.
Hello and welcome to the ParentNet podcast. My name is Ariel and I'm your host for this episode. In Singapore, connecting generations can be challenging, especially as the nuclear family becomes more detached from the extended family, including grandparents. There are several factors why. The cultural shift towards the nuclear family, space constraints which makes it difficult to accommodate the extended families living together, and work or lifestyle demands on dual working parents. But why are these relationships so crucial? How do grandparents play a vital role in a child's development? How do children in turn enrich the lives of their grandparents? Joining me on this podcast are Ariel Lim and Abdul Hamid from Cultivate SG, an independent non-profit organization which wants to see families and our society thrive for generations. Welcome to the ParentNet podcast, Ariel and Hamid. Thank you for joining us today. Please share about yourself so that we can get to know you a bit better.
Hi, I'm Ariel. I'm the chairman of Cultivate. So my family of origin, we come from a family of 5. I'm the elder sister to 2 younger brothers. For myself, I have 2 daughters and 1 more's on the way. So it will also be a family of 5. So quite excited for that.
Hi, my name is Abdul Hamid. Just call me Hamid. I'm actually a grandfather. I'm so happy to be a grandfather now. Just had my first grandson born not long ago. I live with my grandmother for most part of my life. I really have something to share with you how my grandmother have shaped my views, mold my values, because I personally went through that phase where my mother was actually a divorcee. I became a single parent, and it was my grandmother who came in to support, to give us the comfort and the confidence to go through this phase of life. I was still very young at that stage, so I'm glad to be part of this podcast to share you my lived experience.
Welcome once again. I grew up in a generation in Singapore where most young families bought their own homes, which meant that increasingly young children live apart from their grandparents. It then became quite common that extended families only met during birthdays and special occasions. Personally, even though I lived quite near my grandparents when I was growing up, I didn't really have a close relationship with them. So it was only after I became a young working adult, then I got to know them better by spending more time with them. So let's start today's discussion with this, okay? What is the state of the intergenerational family in Singapore today? Do young parents see the importance for their children to bond with their grandparents?
Well, personally, I think this is a challenge to most young parents because they themselves have a very busy life working, and their children tend to be taken care by other people. So that part already is a great challenge. Fortunately, our government has stepped in to make sure that the parents have sufficient time spent with the children. Now, coming to grandchildren, I think that's also a problem. There is a generation gap. Because like you say, everybody's going for a nuclear family, and most grandparents don't stay with their children. And in fact, for some reason, they all would prefer their children to be on their own, have their own family, so they only meet perhaps occasionally to be together. But I seldom see a family where we have an extended family, we have the grandpa, parents, and children living under one roof. It's rare. But perhaps not in my culture, because I'm a Malay Muslim. We tend to value such relationship. That's where my grandmother came in, say, we'll help out. And in fact, grandparents have a very important role to play in nurturing the lives of the children, not their children, their grandchildren, especially in transmitting the right values.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Aaron, you observed. I think for my generation, I guess millennials, we value the whole idea of private spaces. And so the nuclear family, I would say, is really an increasing trend. Personally, I do value the intergenerational bonds because I also want time for myself. So I get my mom to be involved, my in-laws to be involved to take care of my kids quite often, a few times a week. And every weekend night, one is reserved for my grandma's house where I meet like the extended family. So my daughters will meet their great grandma and their great grandpa, and then all the grand aunts and the aunties and uncles. So that's quite a big family. My mom comes from a family of 7 children, so quite a few aunties and uncles there. And then the other night is saved for my family. And then my in-laws, right? So it's like we go visiting for Chinese New Year every single weekend. It can be tiring. Scheduling sometimes is difficult. I mean, I wouldn't say we do it every weekend, but we try to. We do make an effort to be plugged in with the extended family and with the different generations. And I think it's important for my kids to see elderly. So my first child is a COVID baby. She actually developed a strange fear of people with white hair. So actually that kind of lack of exposure affects them to a certain extent. And I saw that during the COVID period. So I guess after COVID, it was important for me to expose my children and to just build those bonds. So statistically speaking, it's also true that I think what Hamid mentioned, the 3-generation households are decreasing. Although I think there's still about 1/5 of the people in Singapore who stay in such 3G households. I think statistics also show that grandparents spending time with grandchildren is also decreasing. There are some research studies on this. Cultivate recently did a new parenthood and work survey, and one of our questions covered who is the main caretaker for children. Grandparents come up third. So after the mom, then the dad, then it's grandparents, and then it's domestic helpers, etc., etc. So I guess I was surprised because I thought the helpers would be next after mom and dad. But I guess the culture of having grandparents step in is still quite strong in Singapore, which would be a good thing.
Could it be the grandparents are wanting to be more intentional these days as well compared to the past?
So I've heard mixed reviews on that. Some of them are definitely more intentional. But I've also heard the converse where, the grandparents are like, okay, I've done my dues, I brought you guys up, and now it's time for me to, live my life, and it's your turn to, pay your dues. So it's a bit mixed reaction, although majority still seem to want to grandparent and want to be involved.
Well, when we're talking about children, you're referring to age probably 12 years and below. But remember, my mother considered her children any age. Even at my age, already 65 years old, he would consider me as her child. And it's good to see where the parents treated the children, not by the age, but in terms of the love, in terms of the care and the concern. You may be growing older, but you are still my child. And we still have that role to play. Parenting role do not stop just after the child has turned 12. Even when he got married and have his own children, there is still this role to play. So for me, I have this challenge, where we draw the line between parenting role and grandparenting role. Now I'm learning because I just had my first grandson, and I have to say, how should I behave as a parent? How should I behave as a grandparent? There's one thing for sure that I always bear in mind. I would not actually interfere with the authority of my child as a parent. He would have the final say of how he wants to bring up the children. But where do I step in? That's very important. I don't have a clear answer on that, but I know this is something I can fill the gap.
Wow, I think that's really wisdom. When to step in as a grandparent, when to step in as a parent, and when do we let go? When do our children actually grow up to become the parent of their own as well? I've been working with young people, right, with teens through the FemChess movement in the past 10 years, and they often tell me this. They want to get to know their grandparents, but they don't know how to start. They shared with me that it's very awkward to have conversations sometimes, and they just don't know how. From your personal experiences, what are some common hurdles you face when having to facilitate such intergenerational bonds?
My view is that less words, more actions, because children learn through observations. There's no point talking and telling them what to do, and that you have to set the example. You have to show how you should behave. They will learn because they are quite discerning. So one thing for sure is that if I'm not happy with my own child, that is my grandson's parent, I will not correct him in front of him. So I think that's very important because you have to preserve that respect that the child has. So if you need to scold, don't scold openly in front of the child. That's one of the ways I would do. And the parents must also be aware about how they should treat their own parents. And when they do so, the child, look at it. Look, how my mother treat my grandmother. They learn. There's no need for words, all right? It's really how you behave at home, at workplace, at your daily activities. The child learn from the behavior, from the conduct, and in fact, your voice also does matter. Never raise your voice in front of a child because it affects his emotions. Because words have emotions, not just the word itself, but the way you speak, the way you relate the message also makes a difference.
I was want to laugh during Hamid sharing because he sounds like my mom talking to me sometimes. What Hamid said about knowing when to step in and navigating those tensions is such a real issue. I just remember when I was a younger mother, I had such an issue with my mom, really had to navigate those tensions because we are such different personalities and we have really different approaches in life. And we had a lot of tension because of that. I mean, if the tension is there, but then you also want her to take care of your kids, it's like, how do I walk this, thorny road, right? And it's so true, actions are what matter, and how your child sees you treating your mom, it will come back to you. That's what my mom loves to tell me, because sometimes in a fit of anger I might burst at her and say, "Mom, you can't do this, this goes against what I'm teaching her," for example. And then if I'm too fierce, now I realize my daughter sometimes speaks to me a bit rudely, and then my mom will look at me with those "I told you so" eyes. So I guess I really resonate with what Hamid said about your kids are picking up all your actions, not just what you say, but what you do. And it's a big life lesson for me. It's like a joke among my family members because my brothers will laugh at this when my kids are a bit rude to me because it's like, you are getting your dues. I also struggle with the whole it's awkward to talk to my grandma thing. But I realized one of the ways is just the presence, your presence, just going there, showing up, being there, and even the small talk, asking them how their week went, how their health issues are. I mean, a little goes a long way for grandparents and grandchildren with the generation gaps and all. I mean, you won't be best of friends and understand everything they're going through, but the care and the love that is shown through small acts of just my grandma feeding me eating her food and, thanking her for it, enjoying it, I think it brings a lot of joy in unsaid ways.
You mentioned about the generational gap, and I know that seniors these days also feel the distance, especially with technology, when their grandchildren or their children are on phones or devices, and then at the same time, I want to be part of your world, but I don't know what this world is like. How can we help both sides, whether is it the younger person or the older person, connect in that sense?
This is really a challenge. The mobiles and the devices, they actually disconnect a relationship, but we don't have a solution because we are living in an era of digital economy, digitalizations, and we know they are quite dependent on the mobiles. In fact, you'll ask me, can I live without my mobile phone? I would say, no, I need it. It's all there, all in one, communication, my messages, my videos, my photos, everything's in there. So it's a concern. So coming to that, all right, I think we have to set aside intentionally to get the mom, dad, grandchildren together. So for me, Sunday is a family day. No activities. Don't call me to do volunteer work on Sunday or disturb me. Intentionally. And we will make sure that's the day where everybody can come together, at least to have a meal. And I think having a meal together opens up the communication process and so forth. That's how we have been doing. And once it becomes a routine, it's a weekly routine. So I always look forward to my grandson visiting me on Sundays.
My family used to have a rule that we wouldn't use our phones during meal times. Okay, I think we still keep to that, as in my parents and me and my siblings. And I guess when I go to my grandma's house, I'm definitely guilty of just sitting there and vegetating with my phone. But there are moments, when you're eating, I'll try and put it away and just have conversations over the dinner table. I definitely struggle with screen time. So it's quite interesting because I think the government is also realizing that they're trying to reduce phone usage among the younger generation. But one way that we involve our grandparents, so my husband is very intentional about this. Every time we visit his grandpa, which is once in 3 weeks, he will always take his grandpa's iPad and then transfer all the updated photos, videos of the grandchildren into the iPad. He does this every time we meet. So it's like a ritual for him. So actually the digital device becomes beneficial for his grandfather to keep in contact, to keep updated on what the kids are doing and all that. So I guess it's about using these things wisely to our own benefit and learning how to keep it away when it, takes away from the relationship.
I have a 2-year-old son, and we have zero screen time for him throughout the whole entire week. But every Saturday for about 20 minutes, he has a video call with his great-grandmother. And it's a weekly routine. In fact, he'll actually remind us if we have not called in. And it's something that we find very precious because he's the youngest in the family and my grandma's like the oldest in the family. And these two just connect so well. Of course, they try to meet face-to-face as well. But I think having that form of communication, even through the video, I think that helps for them to at least recognize each other.
Yeah.
I'd like to zoom in on the topic of culture now. I understand that Cultivate, your work involves facilitating a space where conversations can be had in a civil and respectful manner, where the outcome is not necessarily a pushing of one's view or agenda, but rather the space for individuals to hear other perspectives, reflect, come to their own conclusions on what's good for them and good for society at large. So in essence, you are in the world of cultivating culture, right? My question is, what are the practical tips or tools can you share with us to foster a culture here in Singapore where intergenerational interactions are the norm?
Well, we have to have a good degree of emotional intelligence between parents, children, and grandparents. There's always this interaction, dynamics involved. So I'm not sure how to do it, but it's important to be respectful of each other's views and opinions. My children, for instance, nowadays the children are very intelligent. They don't like to be told. Maybe because they're also exposed to what they learn in school, to their peers. They have their own views. So parents have to be aware not to be too instructional or dogmatic. Allow the space for them to express themselves, to be clear of it. Otherwise, you will lose that precious confidence where they are perhaps want to share with you something confidential, something that affects them personally, but the way you behave inhibits him from actually coming to you and share. I think that's very important. In other words, we try to encourage open communication. But at the same time, you must also know where to draw the line because we do not want the children to be rude to their parents. So you have to draw the line. Yes, say what you like to say, but there are also boundaries that you need to observe. For instance, you don't shout at your parents. Even if you disagree, how would you manage such conflicts? It is something we have to learn along the way. So it's an evolving experience that we go through.
So I'll be honest, Cultivate, we don't have the answers yet, but we are looking into it. We are looking to see how to increase the intergenerational bonds within families. And we believe when every family does this better, it will also affect the whole of society, right? And one of these things is also actually, like what Hamid said, emotional intelligence and communication skills. I think a huge part is learning how to disagree well, because nowadays, I think there are a lot of tensions that come from generational gaps in how to bring up children, for example. A lot of new trends like baby-led weaning, which might put off a lot of the older generation, for example, or even very strict no screen time. Some older generation it's just TV, you grew up on that, for example. So it's a lot of learning how to communicate your ideas while being civil, respectful, and not allowing the emotions to get too heated. And I think Cultivate is also for building intergenerational spaces. So even though we don't live in the same household, how do we have common spaces where we can interact? How do we have common spaces where we still see older generations caring for younger generations together? Yeah, so I guess more research on this, we'll have more ideas in time. But I do think we are trying to foster also a culture of honor towards the older generation, because sometimes a lot of the trends would be going away from that. It's more like, okay, new is always better. Whatever we think must be more right than what, our parents used to think. I think it's true sometimes and it's false sometimes. Sometimes our parents do know better and we need to react differently to them. I guess it's also to get over a lot of the emotional baggage that, a lot of my generation has, that, you have told us what to do since young, now we don't want to listen to you at all. So it's a lot of getting over yourself also, and shifting away from a culture of blame to one of a culture of honor and of recognizing when people are just right and wrong and being able to live with that.
Yes, being objective and not being so emotional all the time, right? Just being able to know that there is a better way.
Yeah.
And my way may not be the right way. In fact, my parents, my grandparents, they have been through this, they know what it's like, and they are actually pointing us the way, but we may not be privy to it. How can communities benefit when there are strong intergenerational interactions and bonds?
Well, my view is that it is how to strengthen relationships. As you are aware that our government itself says the family is the foundation of a society. So intergenerational bond actually bring a family of families together. Not talking about one single family, but it's also bringing all the related families together to strengthen the relationship. And this is important, especially in our aging population. We need to be surrounded by our loved ones, by our friends and relatives, because all these will form what I would call your social support system. In times of need, where you need someone to listen to be comfort, at least the first thing that you go through is your family members, relatives, and friends. So having this will help to nurture the process in ensuring that we have a good community that takes care of one another.
So I think historically, Singapore has always had this idea that whatever families can solve, the government shouldn't solve. But we are moving away from that. There's a lot of institutionalization, including care for the younger ones and the older ones, basically those that are not really seen as in their prime, not really seen as like at their peak of their lives. And I think institutionalization is not wrong, but there are certain, I guess, unseen side effects. When you outsource care, this dilutes relationships, for example. It is definitely the more convenient way, but I think we also need to see that there are unseen costs to that. And I really like what Hamid said about the family of families, because when these families come together and they provide care and support that cannot be bought outside, it provides a valuable, I guess, benefit to wider society also. And just echoing the aging population point, I think that if we don't strengthen the intergenerational bonds, we will start to see society being more polarized, being more divided, and that wouldn't be good for our social fabric, for our social connections. So for me, I'm only now realizing the cost of healthcare for elderly folk when I'm seeing my own grandparents. And if I never saw my own grandparents, if I never heard of them, I just lived my own life, I wouldn't have a very real understanding of the cost of healthcare for older folk. And I wouldn't be concerned about that. So this is just a personal way that we start to see how on a social or society-wide basis, Singapore will be under that cost of an aging population, and how can we as citizens, how can we as small families alleviate some of that cost through our personal interactions, So, for example, my brother brought my grandpa for a checkup, even though he has 7 kids and all 7 couldn't make it. So he stepped in. Or my husband steps in sometimes to provide care for his grandpa when the other children are not able to make it. So we're starting to see we can also play a part in our grandparents' healthcare, not just our parents.
So, we've come to almost the end of today's episode. Thank you for sharing such gems of wisdom with us. But before you go, do you have any parting words to share with our listeners?
Build supportive relationship. And by that, I mean strengthen your bonds with your loved ones, with your family members. That's the starting point. Supportive relationships is very important because it will help you go through, from my own experience, I'm now going through a phase what we call about golden years. And I know many people at my age, they have this feeling of loneliness, a feeling of being disconnected from the community. But if you have intergenerational bonds built up from scratch, that will help. You'll be surrounded by people who are able to support you to go through that phase of life.
We are unique as a species in having grandparents who are involved in the lives of grandchildren compared to let's say all the other animals. And this intergenerational or 3-4 generations kind of bonding is quite unique to us as human beings. And I think that's something to be celebrated. And also apparently being around children or grandchildren improves a lot the mental health of grandparents, which is what my mom loves to say. And I guess it's true. So sometimes she just says that, if she's had a bad day, when she sees my granddaughters, not me, my granddaughters, she just lights up and it brings her great joy. And I think that's something that I hope to see more of. Young kids, the innocence, the purity. And when I go around kopitiam, it's all these uncles and aunties who are not smiling, suddenly change when they see my kids, right? So it's something that is a bit inexplicable. I haven't really thought much about it, but I see it happening. So I hope that this kind of joy can be shared in the society.
Thank you both so much. We really appreciate you sharing and just doing what you're doing at Cultivate. So thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to find out more about the work Cultivate does, do check out their website at www.cultivate.sg. Their Instagram handle is Cultivate Singapore. For more parenting resources, do visit our website at www.family.org.sg. That's all we have for today. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Do keep tuning in to the Parent Ed podcast to learn and grow in your parenting journey.